This is Kevin from LA Session Drummer. I'm going to show you some quick tips and tricks for making sure your delivery of your drum part to a mixer or a producer goes off perfectly without any issues with your parts or stems. On my screen, I have a song a friend of mine actually just released recently. It's called Changing of the Guard. It's by Poel, P-O-E-L. You can check it out. I used the LA Session Drummer 80s Gretsch kit, and they used the audio from the LA Session Drummer kit for the production. So this MIDI region here is everything that I sent. And you can see the parts. I'll play a little bit of it for you. I probably won't play the demo just in case Austin doesn't want me to play the rough demo. Cool. So, first thing, if you're going to record drum parts and you're planning on sending it back to someone, when you're working with MIDI, it's really important that you have the track beat mapped to your DAW. So in Logic, if you look on the top lane here, I have the tempo of the song, which was easy. They did it to a click at 180. But later in the song, there's a little tempo change, and I needed to make sure I matched that to their session. If you don't do that and you send the MIDI's gonna just stick with the grid even if it's not on any beat at all. And when you send that MIDI back to somebody and it's not synced to the DAW, it's just a giant mess. It's almost impossible to use. And then once you do that, record your parts, and I've already done that. I've already got the parts recorded, so the only thing left to do is to, one, I want to export the MIDI so the producer or mixer has it, just in case they want to swap out a sound. In Logic, I just make sure there's one note way at the beginning of the MIDI region, just in case it doesn't export on the downbeat. And then I can right click that and export as MIDI file. You can use whatever file naming that makes sense for you. For this, I would probably say song name, BPM, Kevin drums, MIDI. And that's how I would export that MIDI part. But I also want to send the audio. There's 3 ways you can do this. One, you can simply say, okay, well, the drum mix is great, or maybe you mixed the drums and everybody's happy already. That's wonderful. So then go to the beginning of your guide track, set your export cycle, and just solo that drum channel, export it. You have a stereo drum mix. But I know a lot of times producers and mixers, they'd prefer to have like the kick and the snare separate and the tom separate and the hi-hat and the ride, like all of it separate. So another way you can do that pretty quickly is duplicate the LA Session Drummer stereo out, and I'm going to call this one snare, and we're going to call the first one kick. Whatever you're thinking you're going to export separate, like this is going to be toms, hi-hat, ride, and then I'll have the rest of the cymbals here. To make sure that it exports that way, an easy way to do that is to go into each instance of contact with LA Session Drummer, and in the kick one, go into the mixer and solo the kick. Snare, same deal, just solo the snare. Toms, solo all 3 toms. You get the idea. We're going through everything. So the only audio that comes out of the stereo channel is the one we want on that track. And then once I copy in all the MIDI to each of these tracks together, you'll hear the drum kit. And on the mixer down here, right, we got our kick channel, we got our snare channel, hi-hat, crashes, and then the toms. Let me find a fill, some toms. Cool, right? Okay, so now we have all of our instruments separated, and I can highlight all of these tracks. I can go to my DAW and say, hey, I want to export these 6 audio tracks I'll set the cycle range so it matches the demo track or the guide track, and then I will put like a custom name, like song name, BPM 180. Even though it has that automation, I'd still put that in there as the main tempo. And then I would export into my deliverables folder. That's how you could deliver a more detailed capture of the drum kit. It's not exactly what a studio drummer would send, because a studio drummer doesn't get to choose one thing at a time. This is great if you know that the production's going to be pretty slick and polished, because you get so much control over, like when John Robinson recorded all the like Michael Jackson parts, and they did them one at a time because they wanted to mix the kick separate from the snare, separate from the hi-hat, and they built these beats one thing at a time. That's essentially what you're doing here, because you could tweak the kick drum to your heart's desire just because it's by itself. The third way you could export all of your audio, this is exactly how it would be coming out of a recording studio. We just want to give people the options, right? We're trying to make people's jobs a little easier, so maybe ask who you're delivering them to and say, like, what do you want? Do you want a stereo mix? Do you want like kick and snare and tom separate? Or do you want full control? And if they say like, oh, I want everything, like every single thing, then what you need to do is set up LA Session Drummer with the multi-out routing, and that's something you can learn to do in one of our walkthroughs on lasessiondrummer.com. So check out multi-out pro mode to learn how to set up LA Session Drummer. And now if you check out, I've labeled all of these. So coming out of the overhead channel is the entire kit, but all the overhead samples. And then we have all the room samples for the entire kit. Quite a bit different than the last way we did it, because it was just all the mic sources for the kick and all the mic sources for the snare. But this way you're actually getting all the drum pieces going through the room, the overhead, and the effects mic. And you also get the isolated close mic on a channel for each. So there's the kick, close mic only, just like you would have in a studio. Same thing for the snare. Here's the toms and the hi-hat. There we go. Cool. All right, and then just double check that your routing's good. And what you can do is say, highlight all of the channels you want exported in your DAW. Same thing. There's going to be some export functions in your DAW that allow you to export all of these together. I've set my cycle range to match the guide track so the timing's correct. So my naming convention will be something like this: song name, tempo, KD drums, and then it'll get my track name, which I've labeled to be the correct instrument or mic source, really. And then I'll export to a deliverables folder. Another thing I would recommend doing when you're delivering stems to somebody is include the song guide, even though they already have it, but include an export of it as a reference. So I would, whatever my naming convention was for what I sent, I would say REF for the guide track. And lastly, double check all of the stems in a new session with the reference track before you send them to your mixer or producer. There's nothing more annoying than getting stems that are not right, and then you have to go track down the parts and it slows everything down. So remember, we exported the reference. Whoever's receiving these can double check it against the reference, and then if they need to line it up on their end, they have a point of reference to do that. But I'll mute that, and then let's just listen. This is the multi-out. And let's take a listen. I'm going to make this a little louder for you. There's no processing on this stuff other than I'm just turning a limiter on. I don't want to ruin the snapshot of the kit. Alright, so we've got room. Snare, overhead, flashes. The effects mic. And the toms. I gotta find a tom part though. Cool. So I've double checked my parts. They work. You could even make it part of your workflow to deliver all three of these options whenever you're working with a producer or a mixer or an artist. They'd probably love you for that because then they have so much control over the sound of the parts you recorded. And on top of that, you could also send them the MIDI. You could send them the MIDI drums. You could send them the stereo out. You could send them all of the instruments with all of the mics per instrument. And then you could send it the last one we looked at, which is the multi-out. And the last one is how you would do it in a studio. Thanks for watching. There's more walkthrough videos on lasessiondrummer.com to learn all of the features that you could use in your productions. Make sure to follow us on social media, LA Session Drummer. And my name is Kevin. I will see you in the next video.